All right, welcome back to Tanach Tea. We're going to be finishing the first book of Shmuel, right? So we're going to be finishing Shmuel Aleph, which you should know is not really finishing something because Shmuel is actually one sefer. Who turned it into two? That would be the Christians, all of our prakim and the psukim. All that is not our design. We accepted it in the Middle Ages because we would have to be debating against the Christians, and we got used to using their system. So it's not actually our system, but we're halfway through Shmuel, let's put it that way, even though it's not a perfect split. So we're going to be finishing Shmuel Aleph. We started last year, or did we start 2 years ago, Tanach Tea?
It was ninth grade last year.
It was 2 years ago then, you said ninth grade. Okay, last year you're going into 11th. Okay, fine. So it was almost 2 years because we started at the beginning, right? So we're coming up on our second year, and we've gotten through, this is going to be our 15th parak, or 14th parak. So let's see what's happening here. If you weren't here the past couple weeks, what was happening is that David was hiding from Shaul, and David was hiding amongst the Plishtim, right? And he got their trust. He was doing well over there. And Shaul, at the same time, was having issues, right? He actually brought Shmuel back from the dead in order to speak to him, and Shmuel told him, you're going to die. And Shaul went into battle anyway, knowing that he's going to die. And Shmuel told him if he accepts his fate, he'll be with him in heaven. So you have this battle between the Jews and the Plishtim, between Yisrael and the Plishtim. And what happens is David actually gets out of it, right? And then while he gets out of it, the Amalekim, they come and attack his village, take all the women. David comes back and actually finds all the women and the children, takes them back, and then takes all the spoils from Amalek, kills them out, and starts giving it to all the towns in Israel that had taken care of him, right? So David paid back anyone who took care of him when he was on the run. So that's what was happening with David. But while that's happening with David, things are not going well for Shaul. Shaul is in the middle of the war against the Plishtim, the one that David HaMelech was able to get himself out of, right? He convinced the Plishtim that he wanted to do it, but then we don't fully trust you. And he's like, oh, please let me. And then he kind of played it smoothly. So now let's see what's happening. Perak Lamed Aleph. Uplishtim Nilchamim b'Yisrael. The Plishtim were fighting against Israel. Vayenusu Anshe Yisrael mipnei Plishtim. And the men of Israel fled from before the Plishtim. Vayiplu Chalalim Har Gilboa. And fell dead on Mount Gilboa. So is this war going well for Israel? Not at all, right? Now, why isn't it going well? Well, one of the reasons why it wasn't going well is because they already went into the war dispirited, right? They went into the war with bad mojo, right? They just felt that things were going to go bad. They weren't confident, right? Which obviously is not a good recipe for winning a war. Now, did they know about the prophecy that Shaul knew? Shaul knew that they were going to lose, right? He knew he was going to die. They didn't know, but maybe subconsciously, you could feel it in the air that they knew that, things were bad. Okay? Vayid beku Plishtim es Shaul. The Plishtim overtook Shaul. So now his men started to run, right? Shaul and whoever stayed essentially abandoned. So they overtook Shaul, Vias Banav, and his sons. Vayaku Plishtim es Yonatan. And the Plishtim struck. They killed Yonatan. Vias Avinadav, and Avinadav. Vias Malkishua, and Malkishua, Bnei Shaul, the sons of Shaul. Vatichbad ha-mechama el Shaul. And then the war turned on Shaul. Vayimtse'eu hamarim anashim bakesha v'yachal ma'od ma'amarim. And there were archers shooting at him, and he was terrified of these archers. So, despite the retreat of the troops, as you can see, Shaul and his sons kept fighting on, right? They kept fighting. Now, the Plishtim, though, without fighting an entire army and only fighting a smaller amount, overtook them pretty easily, and they killed 3 of Shaul's sons right in front of him, right? As we saw in the pasuk, Yonatan died, Aminadav died. What was the third name? Malkishua died. Shaul has a 4th son. His name is Ishbosheth. And either he wasn't there or he ran away. But Ishbosheth is the only surviving son. And some say that the generals, Avner and Amasa, were there but escaped, because we're going to see them later on in the story. But as of right now, is Shaul dead? He's not dead, right? We saw his sons die, but he's not dead, right? And he's being shot at by the archers. And the question is, what's he afraid of? He went into this war knowing that he's going to die. So what's he afraid of? He knew the whole time that death is imminent. Anybody? David? David's not nowhere to be seen right now. So what he's afraid of is actually afraid of being captured alive, right? He is afraid of being captured alive and abused and this and tortured, right? That's his fear as these arrows are raining down on him. Vayomer Shaul, so Shaul said, L'noshe Kelev, to his weapon bearer, Shalov charbacha, draw your sword, v'dakrani, and stab me. Ba pen yavu harelim, lest these uncircumcised ones, ha'ela udakrani, let them come and stab me, v'yisalulu bi, and abuse me. Below Ava no say Caleb, but his weapon bearer refused. He didn't want to do it. Ki Yerama od, because he was very afraid. Vayikach Shaul, this is a famous scene. Shaul took es hacherev, the sword, vayipol eleha, and he fell on it. Have you heard this before? That Shaul fell on his own sword, right? So Shaul committed suicide, right? He knew that death was coming. He was afraid of being abused. His weapon bearer wouldn't do it, so he took the sword and jumped on it, right? Okay. So, if you notice, he calls them uncircumcised ones, right? So, as you can see how he feels about the people that would potentially capture him, that they're the type of people who worship, they do idolatry, and what they would take his body, bring it into a temple, who knows what they would do with it, right? So you can see that he really has contempt for the possibilities here. So he decides to, Abby's not here, but as Abby would say, he decides to off himself. She won't hear that in the recording either. You have to tell her I said that later. All right. So, anyways, what you see from over here is you see Shaul's greatness, right? Like, this is like pure bravery. Goes into a battle knowing that he's going to die, and him and his children fight it out to the very end, knowing what the prophecy says for them, right? And he accepted Hashem's wishes, right? He accepted it. He was fully accepting of it, and thereby he went to heaven, as Shmuel had predicted. Now the question is Shaul allowed to take his own life?
Well, he's a martyr, so yes.
Why would you say yes?
Because you're if it's it's for the right cause, like them not using your body for Hashem.
Okay, so you're saying that there was good reason. There was Chilul Hashem that they would do with his body, and therefore there's reason. So there's a pasuk in the Torah that says, only the blood of your own lives will I demand an account, which we learn from there that you're not allowed to commit suicide, right? Based off that pasuk. But there's a word over there, only. And whenever the word only appears, that means that there's an exception, right? Because it says only, right? So it's just say without the only. When it says only, that means that there is a situation in which it is allowed. So some say that what is the situation that's allowed? A situation like this one, right? A situation in which your options are to essentially do idol worship, right? His body was going to be abused and used as idol worship, etc., etc. And in this case, suicide would have been allowed. Matzada comes to mind as another example of this. That's one opinion. There's another opinion that when the Torah says the word only, it means this exception and that's it. Meaning, don't take the rule out of it. According to the other opinion, the Torah was saying the word only for one time in history. For Shaul, doing it now. Why does Shaul get to be the exception? Because he had a prophecy that he was going to die. He's not committing suicide, right? It looks as if he's committing suicide, but he already knew that he's going to die. It's not suicide. Shmuel told him, you will die in this war. It's just a matter of if he's going to be tortured first or not, right? So that is another opinion on it. And some suggest that Shaul even took his own life as a punishment to himself for killing the city of Kahanim, which we spoke about a while back ago. But then others point out that, no, you can't self-punish yourself. That would not be allowed. Okay. Anyways. By the way, there's another opinion that he just panicked, right? He saw his 3 children killed in front of him. The war was, arrows are raining down on him, and it wasn't the correct decision, but he just, under those circumstances, he panicked and took his own life. Pasuk Hey. Vayar no se Kelev. The weapon bearer saw Kimei Shaul, that Shaul was dead. Vayipol gam hu al charbo. and he also jumped on his sword. Vayamas Yimo, and he died with him. Vayamas Shaul, Shaul was dead. Ushlosha banav, and his 3 children. Benose Caleb, and the weapon bearer. Gam kol anasha vayomahu yachtav. All of them died together on the same day. Vayiru anshe Yisrael, and when the people of Israel saw Asher be'ever ha'emek from the other side of the valley, ve'asher be'ever ha'yarden and the other side of the Jordan, because remember, ki nasu anshe Yisrael, because they already fled, but they're watching from a distance. V'chol mesu Shaul, they saw that Shaul died. Uvanav, and his children, vayavzu esarim, they abandoned the cities. Vayanusu, and they fled. Vayavau, Plishtim, and the Plishtim came. Vayishva behen, and they lived in them. So as you can see, this territory was lost during this war, right? They lost, it's unclear exactly how much territory they lost, but the Plishtim took, a large portion of Israel, right? They lost the war, they abandoned the cities, and the Plishtim took over. So, this tragedy is not done. We're going to see the next pasuk that the Shaul's tragedy is really not done, because Ishbosheth is going to end up dying. He's going to become king. He's going to end up dying. He's going to be killed in his own bed. And then Shaul's other descendants are going to be hung by a group of people that had a problem with him. And the reason why Shaul's whole family is essentially going to be killed out is because of what he did to the Kohanim. He killed out of the city of Kohanim, father and son and family. So that's what happened to his family, though I will point out that Mordecai and Esther are descendants of Shaul. So he wasn't totally wiped out. He lived on, and great people can come from Shaul. Anyways, you know the concept of Mida Keneged Mida? So Shaul's punishment over here is Mida Keneged Mida. How so? He killed the city of Kohanim with a sword. He got put to death by a sword. His sons died with him. He killed father and sons, as I just said. Yonatan, too, had a part in the sin, because we mentioned this a long time ago, but had he given David food on the way out, David never would have stopped by Nov, the city of Kohanim. They never would have fed him, and Shaul never would have killed him. So Yonatan kind of also booked his death over there, even though it's a very, very, very small sin. It's very hard to understand, but Hashem is strict with the tzaddikim, and that should show Yonatan's greatness if he's being killed for that. And also Shaul's other sin, not the killing in the city of the Kohanim. What's his other major sin? Anybody know Shaul's major sin besides for killing a city of Kohanim? Not killing Agag. And why didn't he kill Agag? He had mercy and he wanted the spoils of the war. He left sheep alive, etc., etc. The next day, the Plishtim came back to take his body and his children's body and their swords and everything as spoils of the war, because his sin was with spoils of the war. So this is the Mida Keneged Mida that Shaul was punished with. As you can see, Shaul took all of his punishments in this life. He took it. The death was the punishments, right? Therefore, he went up to heaven, right, once he died. Okay. By the way, another interesting thing here is that the clothing of the Kohanim atone for the sins of murder and things like that, and violence and slander and whatever. So the fact that he killed Kohanim made it that it wasn't possible for him to get an atonement any other way besides for death. Like you could bring a carbon and you could do atonement another way. He killed the atonement, right? So it's just another deep over there. He had no means to get this crime off his record any other way. Pasuk Chet. Vayhi memacharat, and it was the next day. Vayivohu Plishtim, that the Plishtim came, lifashet esachalilim, to despoil the dead. Vayimtzu, and they found Shaul, v'yesh lo banav, and his 3 sons, Noflim, Har Gilboa, all dead on the mountain of Gilboa. Vayichretu es rosho, so they cut off his head. Vayishitu es kelav, and they stripped him of his weaponry. V'ashlechu be'eretz Plishtim, and they paraded it throughout the land of the Plishtim. Saviv, around, levaser beisatz be'em, and in their temples. V'yasa'am, and to all the people. Vayisumu es kelav beis Ashtaros, and they put his weaponry in the temple of Ashtaroth. V'es givyoso, and his body taku b'chomat, they put on the wall, they nailed it to the wall. Beit Shan, in Beit Shan, which is another temple of theirs. So the Plishtim come, they see Shaul and his 3 children, They want to make it seem like they killed Shaul, not that he offed himself, right? So what do? They cut off his head, right? So they make it seem like they did it. And then they want to kind of send a message. You know what their message was? You may not remember this. I don't even think we discussed it. Yeah, this is before we started learning. But if we go way back, the Plishtim at one point stole the Aron. And they had the Aron and they put it in their temple next to their god. His name is Dagon. And things kept on happening, like spooky things. They found their god in the morning with their head cut off. Eventually, they got so fed up with holding the Aron that they ended up giving it back to the Jews, right? But they had the Aron. And it was causing terrible problems for them. So what they did is they wanted to prove that their God has legitimacy. So they chopped off Shaul's head to show that this was revenge for the Aron chopping off Dagon's head, right? So they're kind of making this equivalency over here. Now, they took Shaul's body and his sons, and they hung him with nails, literally nails, on the wall of their temple, right? You walked into a Plishti temple, and Shaul and Yonatan's bodies were there like, when people go hunting, right? Like prizes, right? Now, there's a miracle that birds and animals wouldn't come and touch their bodies, right? Because what usually happens, right? Animals show up to pick at their bodies, but Hashem caused a miracle that did not happen. Let's continue. Vayishmu'u elav yishvei Yovesh, and then the people Gilad, the people who lived in Yovesh Gilad, es asher asu Plishtim l'Shaul, they heard about what happened, about what the Plishtim did to Shaul. Vayikumu, and they got up. Kol ish chayil, every brave man. Vayachu, kol alayla, and they went through the entire night. Vayachuchu es giviat Shaul, and they took the body of Shaul. V'es giviot banav, and the bodies of his children. Mechomat, from the wall, Beishan of Beishan. Vayavohu, and they brought it, Yavesha, to Yavesh. Vayisrafu otam sham, and they burnt them there. Now, that's probably not the ending you were expecting, right? Because here you have these people who it says they heard what happened, and you see they endanger their lives. They go through the night, and they're ready to perform this chesed shelemes for Shaul, right, and his children, this final kindness, right, the only one you could do when people die, and they're going to go give them a proper burial, you would assume, right? They're going to risk their lives to get them out the temple and save them. And the pasuk calls them brave men, right, chayalim, and they went into a Plishti temple, right, to take their bodies out, really sacrificing their lives. And then they burnt their bodies. It's like, what? Like, that doesn't add up at all. What do you mean they burnt their bodies? They risked their lives to defile their bodies, right? Cremation is not allowed in Judaism. What happened to the proper burial? So if you look at the next pasuk, you're going to see that it says they buried them. So clearly they didn't burn them. The next pasuk says, and they buried them. So what does that mean that they burnt them? So one explanation is that it was customary to light a fire before the body of a king who passed away. So when a king passed away, you would light a fire, and you would take all of the king's personal belongings as the body passes by and throw it into the fire as a means to say that the king's bed is holy, and the king's fork is holy, and the king's this is holy. No one else can use it. It needs to be gone. And you should know, I just learned this today, that there's some people have a minhag that on Lag BaOmer, they throw clothes into the fire as a same idea, essentially. Even though if you don't have a family minhag to do it, the poskim say don't do it because it's wasting clothes and whatever. But I just saw this today, that it's a thing to do this on Lag BaOmer, to throw things into the fire. So here you see what does this mean? That means they did a Lag BaOmer for Shaul, right? They burnt all this stuff. Another opinion is that, by the way, David, we're going to see in the future that David is going to reward these men for what they did. So clearly another proof that they didn't burn their bodies, because why would David show up and be like, oh yeah, you did cremation on Yonatan? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? So another opinion is that they were burning fragrances, like around, in order to hide the smell of the bodies, right? There's also an opinion that they actually did burn the bodies, but to prevent the Plishtim from digging them up and doing the same thing. But that doesn't make sense with the other things that we said. But let's continue. Last pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. Vayikuchu etz atzmosehem. So they took their bones, vayikrubu, and they buried them. They buried tachat eshel, under an eshel, or under a tree, bayovesha, at Yovesh, Vayitzumu shivat yamim, and they fasted 7 days. So, first of all, it's clear from what they did that it's a thing that when a person passes away, when a tzaddik passes away, you fast, right? And we actually see that when Avner dies, David HaMelech fasts for him. And I actually saw today as well, because I was looking up for things for Lag BaOmer, that really, what we're supposed to do on Lag BaOmer for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's death? We should fast. That's what makes sense to do. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself said that you should celebrate his birthday. There's various reasons given why, so that's why it's been flipped. But really, this is actually the proper course of action. That it gets to Tzaddik Short side, it maybe makes sense to fast. Though nowadays, I'd say a lot of people do the opposite, right? People they do the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai route, especially Hasidim, right? They do the celebrating of the day. The idea over there is that when somebody is really into Kabbalah, it's like death becomes like an opening for them to really see what they've been practicing their whole life. So for someone who's into Kabbalah, they make it like death is a happy thing. It's like getting married to Hashem and you've been waiting your whole life, you've been engaged. But anyways, let's wrap this up. You should know later on a huge famine is going to hit the Jewish people. And David's going to try and find out why. And he finds out the reason why is because Shaul and Yonatan and the other sons never had a proper burial. So I'm going to read you a quote from Shmuel Bet. Then David went and took the bones of Shaul and the bones of Yonatan his son from the men of Yavesh Gilad, we just said, who had stolen them from the open place of Bet Shan where the Philistines had hung them. When the Philistines had defeated Shaul in Gilboa, he brought up from there the bones of Shaul and the bones of Yonatan his son, and they gathered the bones of those that had been hung, and the bones of Shaul and Yonatan his son they buried in the territory of Binyamin, in Selah, in the tomb of Kish his father. So David ends up giving them a proper burial later on, gives them a whole funeral, makes a whole procession, and after that, the famine stops in the land. Right? So you see that this still was not considered a proper burial. Now we're done with Shaul, right? We're wrapping up Shaul. Now, when we start Shmuel Bet, everything's going to be through the lens of David HaMelech, right? Or at this point, just David, even though maybe now he's about to become the time when he becomes David HaMelech. But when they received the news that Shaul had died, what do you think David and his men did? Mourned and fasted, right? They mourned and fasted. And David eulogized them, which we'll talk about in the continuation in the next pasuk, and which is, Shmuel Bet. But with that being said, I believe now that Shaul HaMelech has died, we need to wrap up his life, right? We have to do him justice. We spent a lot of time with Shaul HaMelech. We've seen him do really great things, and we've seen him do really bad things. And the truth is, in Tanach Tea, we haven't really seen him do so many great things, because we started it with David. But before that, he was a great king, and he did great things. So the Mam Loz over here quotes Rabbi Yanai. And Rav Yanai says that there are 12 virtuous qualities that could be found of Shaul. And then there's 5 transgressions. So we're going to go through them. So the first one, he was humble. Second one, he would hear himself made fun of, yet remain silent. And all these we see in the Sefer. We can turn back to each one of these stories. But when he got made fun of, he would remain silent. He pardoned affronts to his honor. Right? People would do things and he would pardon them. Right? He took great care in the performing of the mitzvah of tzitzit, which is why when David came and cut off his tzitzit, it was very painful for him. He provided dowries for brides that didn't have money. He would make sure that if people can't get married, he would pay. He was ashamed in Shmuel's presence. Right? He had a tremendous respect for his Rebbe. He was modest. He was generous with his money for the needs of the people. He maintained ritual purity even for food that didn't really require it, which is like Beis HaMikdash stuff. But he was really good with that. He would donate generously to the temple. He wasn't pretentious, right? Not just not humble. He was very down to earth, and he repented and admitted that he sinned. Right? He owned up to it and took the punishment. Right? So those are all things that are beautiful traits of Shaul HaMelech. Some of these led to his downfall, right? We spoke about in Tanach Tea many times that he had too much mercy in the beginning, and that led him to have too much cruelty at the end, right? To put him out of balance. But really, he was a humble. That's why he was chosen to be king. He had king-like qualities. He was humble. He was amazing. He was a tzaddik. He was generous. All these things. Now, what were his 5 transgressions? 1, he did not wait for Shmuel to return before bringing a carbon in Gilgal. He did things, he brought a carbon without Shmuel's permission, right? He did things on his own, right? Without taking the proper guidance. Here's another example of that. He went into battle without asking the Urim V'Tumim first, right? You know the Urim V'Tumim, right? The Choshen Mishpat that the Kohen Gadol wears, and you could ask questions, literally talk to Hashem. Shaul went to a battle without asking, right? So same idea over there. He took pity on Agag and the choice and the cattle of Amalek, right? So another example of his mercy kind of leading to his downfall. And now you see the cruelty that it led to, which is that this is his major sin. He put the city of Kohanim of Nov to death, as we said. And finally, the last sin is that he turned to a medium, he turned to a sorcerer to get answers, right? Instead of Hashem. Now he tried everything with Hashem, but he still should have kept trying with Hashem, right? And it's funny because he was the one who got rid of all the sorcerers in the land, right? So this was something he was passionate about. But anyways, we can wrap this up with just a couple more things, a couple quick ideas, and then we'll be done. That we know that Hashem actually does support Shaul, and we see Shaul's worthiness by the fact that Hashem spared him, as we mentioned earlier, a couple of prakim ago. Hashem spared him the pain of watching someone else descend to his throne. Right? That'd be very painful for him to be alive and seeing David on his throne. Hashem made sure that he died as king, that he wouldn't see someone else take his throne. Also, if you paid attention to what I said before, why did a famine hit the Jewish people during David HaMelech's reign? Because they never eulogized Shaul properly. He never had a proper funeral, the one befit of who he is. So you see how Hashem feels about him. Hashem brought a famine to the land because Shaul never had a proper funeral. And we can compare this to Yeshua. When Yeshua died, he also didn't have a proper funeral. The people did not eulogize Yeshua the way they should have, the way they did for Moshe. Why didn't they? Because when Moshe died, they were in the desert. But when Yeshua died, it was the first generation in Israel. And they were busy working the land. They were busy with Parnasa and things like that. They didn't understand, when it's time to pull away. And the volcano started erupting. And then they went to go and eulogize Yeshua. But as we see, which one is more serious? The punishment for Shaul or the punishment for Yeshua? A volcano threatening to erupt or a famine? A famine. So we see that Shaul actually led to a bigger punishment for the Jewish people. Why is that? Why would Shaul get a harsher punishment from Hashem than Yeshua? Like, we know that Yeshua is greater than Shaul. Like, Shaul is great, but he's complex. Yeshua is not complex, right? Yeshua's up there. Right, so why would Hashem have more of a punishment?
Higher standard.
What?
He might be held to a higher standard than Joshua because he was a king.
But he's getting a bet. I'm saying the people are being punished worse on Shaul's behalf, right? Meaning they didn't eulogize Yeshua and they didn't eulogize Shaul, right? For Shaul they got a famine. For Yeshua they got a volcano threatening them. Based off of that, you would say that Shaul is the greater one, because there was a harsher punishment for the same sin towards, the holiness of a tzaddik. So the reason why is because, yes, Yeshua was greater, but think about their death. Yeshua would go into war knowing that he would win. He was a prophet who spoke to Hashem straight up. Hashem told him you're going to win. Hashem told him everything's going to be good. Yeshua, Hashem tells him, be brave and be strong, right? It's famous with Yeshua. But Hashem is telling you that, like, you're good. Shaul not only didn't get that message, Shaul got the message, you will die in this war and you will lose it. And he went straight in the same way Yeshua went into his wars. And because of the way he went to his death, and because of the bravery that it took Shaul, and Yeshua is usually considered the one that's considered like brave, and right, he led the holy conquest of Israel. But that's why Shaul gets the harsher punishment for the lack of eulogizing his death. So, that is the end of Shmuel Aleph. Any questions on this parak, comments, concerns? When we start Shmuel Bet, we are going to see David's going to get the news that Shaul and Yonatan and Co are dead. And crazy things are going to happen. We'll see what happens. Thank you for coming.